Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's message. I'm Eric, the lead pastor of South Mountain Community Church. Thank you for taking just a bit of your time to be with us today. We exist for one reason, and that's to help as many people as possible take their next step towards becoming fully devoted and fully delighted followers of Jesus Christ. And I know that for so many people, church and even religion can be messy and oh so complicated, but it doesn't have to be that way. Here you can belong before you believe. So our hope is that your first visit with us is enjoyable, meaningful, and unlike the church experiences of your past. We also think that the best way to experience delight is with others in person. So SMCC is about more than just a Sunday sermon. We have 5 locations for you to choose from where you can connect with people in authentic community. We want every message you hear to engage your head, your heart, and your hands for a life of full delight. So with all of that in mind, enjoy today's message.
My name's Trevor. I serve as one of the pastors here at SMCC, and just want to say thanks for joining us today. I'm looking forward to the time together. And I actually want to start with something that is a little bit maybe of a strange proposition. I want to ask a question, throw it out to you all this morning. I want to open up with a bit of a live auction. So the question for you is, how many of you, feel free to throw up a hand if you like, how many of you would be willing to pay $10,000 for this journal? I don't see any hands. There's no one. Okay, so maybe, what if I lowered it a little bit? Maybe $5,000, maybe $1,000, maybe $500. We actually sell them for $10 out in the bookstore, but so if you want one for that price, you can get it there. But who would be willing to pay $100? Right? Maybe even $50 for my green journal. Nobody, not a single hand in the air. All right, well, let me just unpack this a little bit. Let me sweeten the deal and just explain why I'm adding a little bit more to the price for this particular journal. So breaking it down together, here's part of what's included in the offer. When you buy this journal, you get everything that's included in it. All the contents, whatever is inside of this, you also become the proud new owner of that. So all the gift cards that I stuffed into the back, like $200 to Crumble, $200 to Starbucks, $500 to Best Buy, whatever it is, you get all of that. In addition to season tickets to the Jazz, a lifetime Quick Quack membership, right? That's worth it alone. But in addition to all of those things, that's not even the end of it. I also happen to keep some of my important documents in here. So for example, the title to my car. Now I get it's not a sweet red convertible like Mike's, but still it's a steady car. It's reliable. It's a Toyota. So you get that. In addition to that, kind of the cherry on top, is you get my rustic mountain chic cabin in Little Cottonwood Canyon that is complete with a balcony, a sauna, and a hot tub. Beautiful view overlooking the valley. And did I mention that it happens to be located right on Snowbird Ski Resort? It's ski in, ski out. And that's included in here. The deed to that, you can probably guess that that's imaginary. I don't really have that. I wish I did. But so the question is, all of that being the case, all of that being included within the journal, who would be willing to pay $50 for it now? All right, quite a few, that's pretty good. Okay, maybe $100. We'll keep going, $1,000, $10,000, pretty good. So, okay, I won't keep going, but you notice what's interesting is 2 minutes ago, not a single hand was in the air. Not a single person was willing to pay $50, and yet now, a whole bunch of people are willing to pay $10,000 and beyond. And I think what that tells us, what that shows us is, well, on the one hand, it's not really for sale. But on the other hand, it tells us that value is easy to miss. Value is easy to miss. Here at SMCC, we're continuing our series today called The Kingdom is Like, where we've been studying a portion of the book of Matthew where Jesus is teaching these parables, these little stories that are all intended to teach us something about the kingdom of heaven. And the one we're looking at today is one in which Jesus is stressing more than anything else the value that is inherent, that is wrapped up within the kingdom of heaven. So much so that I think you could even simplify it like this, just saying that baseline, what he's trying to say is that the kingdom of heaven is worth more than anything and everything. The kingdom of heaven is worth more than anything and everything. Which is kind of one of those interesting statements, right? That, maybe at first we kind of agree with it, but it's also one of those statements that maybe we agree with it, maybe we don't, but I think it's the kind of thing that often gets sort of put in the category of platitudes, where even if we, sort of nod our heads and say yes and amen, that's absolutely true. It's not the sort of claim that we actually ever take seriously. Not the sort of claim that we really break down and consider, is this actually true? Is it actually right? How valuable is the kingdom? If we were to put a price tag on it, what would its price be? So what I want to do together over the next 25 minutes or so is actually take the claim that Jesus is making in this parable, break it down, unpack it a little bit, analyze it, and see, is he actually right in his estimation of how valuable the kingdom really is? And so to do that, I want to look at the parable together now as we kind of open up and just see how is he actually making this point. So Matthew chapter 13, verse 44. Matthew 13, verse 44. You're welcome to join me there if you like. If not, we'll have it up on the screen. It's just a single verse, but it reads like this. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. And that's it. That is the parable, just a single sentence. And so just for a second, imagine you're the man in the parable or you're a woman in similar circumstances. Let's just we'll make it kind of a Utah version of the parable. So let's say, you fast forward a couple of months and we're finally out of winter, you're into spring, even verging on the brink of summer, and you're on a hike. Let's say you're on Donut Falls, right? Because that's probably the one we all know the most. So you're making your way on up. You've got a nice big walking stick because you're pretending to be Gandalf, even though you wouldn't tell anyone. And as you're making your way up the hill, all of a sudden the stick hits the ground and it makes a thud. Right? A funny sound that kind of catches your ear. It piques your curiosity. And so you stop and you begin to look a little bit closer and realize that there is something buried just beneath the surface of the earth. And so you begin to kind of, brush away the dirt, brush away the dust, and you find the lid of a chest that is unlocked. You flip that thing open only to stumble upon treasure. Gold and gems and sapphires and rubies and gold and silver and cash, all kinds of treasure, right, that is almost beyond estimation in its value. That's exactly what happens to the man in this parable. And in response, he hides it. He buries that thing again. And then he goes away, sells everything that he has, everything that he owns, the entirety of his possessions, so that he can amass enough wealth to then take it and buy this field and possess this treasure. So again, I think the message is pretty clear that what Jesus is trying to say is that the kingdom is more valuable than anything we could ever possess or even dream of possessing in this life. But if we're to take that and kind of move beyond sort of the region of the platitudes, I think the question that we need to consider, maybe even pose to ourselves, is if we were in the same circumstances, right? If we were, to face this ultimatum, let's even call this the Jesus ultimatum game, where on the one hand, we have all of our possessions, everything that we own, and on the other hand, we have the kingdom, the opportunity to receive it, to be found within it, and we had to choose, which would you choose? Would you keep everything that you have to say no to the kingdom, or would you be willing to give up everything you have to take hold of it? And I'll be honest, there's probably several of us here, more than a handful, who are probably not super comfortable with that question. If I'm honest, I'm not super comfortable with that question when I actually begin to take it seriously. And there's probably even a handful of us, maybe even more, who, maybe you wouldn't call yourself a Christian, and you're like, I find that question just flat out ridiculous, because why on earth would I ever give up everything I have for this? How could it ever be worth that much? And that really is the question that we're exploring together today. And I think before we dismiss it out hand, we would do ourselves well to just perform a little market research together. And so we'll jump into that. But along the way, in analyzing the kingdom's value, I think one helpful framework, one helpful lens for looking at it is, I read this in a book one time, that when it comes to, hypothetically speaking, let's say you're gonna open a fried chicken sandwich stand. I don't know if anyone is planning on doing that. I hope so. Let me know if you are, because I love fried chicken sandwiches. But let's say this is your aim, this is your direction in life. And at the beginning of your business, from the very outset, you have the opportunity to have one advantage over every other fried chicken sandwich stand over every other business. And you get the chance to perfect one piece of it. The question is, what would you choose? Would you have the perfect recipe? So the best fried chicken sandwiches in the world, is that what you'd go for? Or would you have the best marketing and branding so that when people encounter it, when they see people out wearing your hoodies and your hats, when they see your ad, when they're scrolling through Instagram, they can't help but come on out and get a fried chicken sandwich? Or would it be the best atmosphere, the best possible vibe that people love to be in, that they love to experience, right? What would be the one advantage you would want over every other fried chicken sandwich stand? And it's been suggested that the best advantage you could possibly have isn't actually any of those. It's the presence of a starving crowd right outside your restaurant. A whole group of people who are desperate for what you have because of their inherent need, because demand drives value. Demand drives value. And so for that reason, if we're analyzing the worth and the value of the kingdom, then I think it's worth considering, is there any demand for it? Is there any person, any group of people, any demographic whatsoever that has any real need for the gospel, for the kingdom, for what Jesus is offering? And that's what I want to look at here today. And I think one helpful way to get at it is here at SMCC, when we talk about the gospel, one of the ways that we commonly do so is with this language of really 2 C's and 3 R's. That first off, the story goes like this, that God created all things, including humanity, and he designed us to live in a particular way that is for our good. And part of what was wrapped up within that is a relationship with God. So we're created for that. And then God commanded us to live in the way that was for our good. He commanded us to our good and even away from our harm. But then the third R, the first R, the third letter, is that we rebelled against God. That humanity rebelled against him, against what we were created for, against what we were commanded to. And in doing so, all of humanity has forever been affected and impacted negatively to the point where we live out of alignment with the life that we were made for and are even barred from the relationship with God that we were designed for. And if you break it down, God is the one who is the source of everything that is good, that is true, that is beautiful, even life itself. And that is the one that we rejected in our rebellion. So what we deserve is a life void and absent of every one of those things. That's actually what we deserve, which is a life absent the kingdom. And so the question is there any inherent need? The gospel says yes. And thankfully, the other 2 R's go on to describe the rest of the story. But for now, we see our need defined there. And again, maybe you're here saying, well, yeah, maybe if you believe that, but what if I don't believe that? Like, how can you say that I've rebelled against a God that I'm not even sure that I believe in? How is that my situation? And again, I think just to unpack it a little bit further, there's one passage later on in the book of Matthew that I think is helpful in what it contributes to this conversation. Because it's a passage in which Jesus takes the ultimatum that he hints at in this parable, and he actually poses it to a real person. And the way that person responds is particularly telling when it comes to our conversation here. So I want to look at that together. Matthew chapter 19, starting at verse 16. Matthew 19, starting at verse 16. It goes like this. Just then, a man came up to Jesus and asked, "Teacher, what good thing must I do to get eternal life?" "Why do you ask me about what is good?" Jesus replied. "There is only one who is good." Real quick, just to clarify, this is not Jesus separating himself from the Father, saying the Father is good and I am not, because the Bible describes God as being triune, one in being three in person, Father, Son, and Spirit. But what's really happening within this conversation, it's kind of a side note here, is that the young man really honestly believes that he is good. And so he's asking Jesus, what do I have to do to get eternal life, expecting that he's already checked the boxes, that he's already got it done. He's just looking for confirmation. He's not really looking for another assignment here. He believes that he is good, earnestly. And so when Jesus says there is only one who is good, he's providing a foreshadowing of the diagnosis that he's about to reveal in this conversation as he unveils some of the hidden things that are happening within this man's heart. And we'll see that as we keep reading. So verse 17, picking it up halfway through, he says, there's only one who is good. If you want to enter life, keep the commandments. Which ones, he inquired. Jesus replied, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony. Honor your father and mother and love your neighbor as yourself. All these I have kept, the young man said. What do I still lack? Jesus answered, if you want to be perfect, go, sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. He poses the very same ultimatum to him that the parable hints at. But the young man responds like this. When the young man heard this, he went away sad because he had great wealth. Unlike the man in the parable, who was able to give away everything that he has and do so in his joy to take hold of the treasure, to take hold of the kingdom, this man faces the very same ultimatum, and yet he can't do it. He's unable to make the transaction. He's unable to give these things up in order to grasp the kingdom. And the question is, why? What's actually happening within this conversation? And scholars have suggested that if you go back in the conversation, one of the things you see is that Jesus, when he's providing his initial answer, he begins to list these commandments that actually come from the 10 commandments that God gave to the people of Israel in the book of Exodus. But Jesus, he doesn't list all 10. He only lists 5 of them. And the 6th thing he said actually comes from Leviticus. It's kind of a summary of the 5 commandments that he did list. And so it's not really clear what happens. Does Jesus stop short and just kind of leave it at that? Or does the young man interrupt him? I'm not entirely sure why he doesn't get all 10 out. But when he poses the question at the end, the ultimatum, it's because he is laying his finger on the one part of this young man's life that is actually out of alignment. That is out of alignment with the way that he was made, with the kind of life that he was designed for. Because he's breaking the very first commandment. If we go all the way back to the book of Exodus, chapter 20, picking it up at verse 1, this is the passage where God gives the people of Israel, he gives them the 10 commandments. And it reads like this, saying, and God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. And he goes on to say that you shall have no other gods before me. That's the very first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me, that nothing in this life should take the place that only I am to take in your life. And so Jesus poses this ultimatum to him, not because it's a requirement to give everything that you have to enter the kingdom, not because this is something that Jesus asks of all of us, but he does it to reveal something to this young man, that there is something that he values in his life more than God, that there is an idol present within his life. And that is the very reason why this young, wealthy man is unable to make the transaction. You could put it like this: if we've settled for a substituted idol like him, we'll struggle to see the kingdom's real value. If we've settled for a substituted idol, we will struggle to see the kingdom's real value. Because the gospel's claim is that we were created for a relationship with God. And yet, because of our rebellion, we've been barred from that relationship. And so we live with this vacuum, this hole. There is something fundamentally missing from our lives. And what do we do in the midst of that? We find something to take its place, a substitute, an idol. And I think one way to illustrate it would be to say, you know, I don't know if maybe some of you like coffee, maybe some of you hate coffee, but just roll with the illustration for me if you would. Let's say that you were designed fundamentally to every day enjoy a 12-ounce pike with cream and a little bit of sugar if that's how you take it. This is what you were made for, this drink at Starbucks. But for some reason, you were barred. You've been banned from Starbucks for the rest of your life. And so it doesn't matter what you do, what you try, even if you try and, throw a mobile order and just slip in and slip out with your drink, it doesn't work. You can't get it. And so in its absence, what do? You settle for something lesser. Instead of Starbucks, you settle for stars and bucks, which is not the same thing. And that's exactly what an idol is. right? In a much more, in a way that's a little bit more grave, a little bit more serious, that bears a little bit more consequences, that we're created for this relationship with God, and yet so often we turn to other things to fill the void that's missing in our lives. And so that is breaking the first commandment. It's idolatry, and as the Bible defines it, that is rejecting, it is rebelling against God. And so whether we believe in God or not, whether we're certain about our trust in Jesus or not, I think it's safe to say that every single one of us, according to this understanding, this definition, has some need according to the way the gospel defines us. And taking that in connection with the parable, if we're to ask the question and kind of, move past the realm of the platitudes, then, if I was posed this ultimatum, if I had to give up everything I have in order to take the kingdom, in order to grasp the kingdom, then where is the tension? For me, where does the rubber meet the road? Because there are some things that I could give away pretty easily. There are some things that I wouldn't have a whole lot of difficulty giving up, but there are some other things in my life that I absolutely would. And so the question is, where is the tension? And, just kind of, if we're gonna get into each other's mess this morning, I figure I might as well share my own. So one example of that would be, if I was gonna have to give up something in my life that would probably be a little bit difficult for me, it would be reading. Reading is one thing that I would have a hard time giving up. And some of you are probably like, I gave up reading years ago and have never looked back. So how on earth would that be difficult for you? But allow me to explain. It's because I have a tendency to define myself according to intelligence. And so if I can say something smart, if I can know the book a person references, or if I can say something that makes me appear smart in the eyes of other people, then that makes me feel good. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, except when it crosses the line and becomes to be the thing that I define myself by. That this is who I am, this is why I have worth, this is why I have value, because then it begins to drive my life. And so what do? I start buying more books. I start dedicating more time to reading. I start consuming more and more and more. Not because I'm enjoying it, but because this is what makes me feel valuable. And anytime I encounter someone who has read more, who says more intelligent things, then all of a sudden my insecurity begins to rise, and I'm just looking for cracks and flaws in them so I can make myself feel better, because it's an idol. It's an idol. Something that takes the place of God within my life and ends up wreaking horrible consequences because of it. And so my question for you is, what do you have a tendency to treat like an idol? What do you have a tendency to treat like an idol? What would you have a difficult time giving up? Even moving past possessions into pursuits and hobbies, even things like that. Maybe for example, it would be your wardrobe or a gym membership, because sometimes appearance can be the thing that we value more than anything else. And so it would be difficult to give that up because it's become an idol. Maybe it would be your role at work, not just because it's the thing that helps provide for you or for your family, but because it's the thing that has become to define your identity. So even if you could find another way to provide for yourself or for your family, you would have a hard time letting this go, because this is who you are. It's more than just a job. It is you. It's because it's become an idol in your life. And pastor and author J.D. Greear, he put together this list of questions that he calls the Idolatry Detector Test. And you can find the whole set of questions just by Googling that, Idolatry Detector Test. But just a few of them I think are particularly helpful when it comes to identifying what the idol is in our lives, or what the idols are. First question being, what one thing do you most hope is in your future? And not necessarily that the answer to that is your idol, but as you walk through the questions and as you see the same themes, the same answers popping up over and over and over again, it begins to be an indicator that perhaps this thing means more to you than it should. Number two, what is the one thing you most worry about losing? A couple of the other questions are, what thing have you sacrificed most for? I think that one's particularly telling? What is it that you hope people find out about you? I think that one's kind of funny when we meet someone, you're having conversation and small talk. What's the thing that you're trying not to drop, but you hope it comes up? What's the thing that you want people to learn? And then lastly, where do you turn for comfort when things are not going well? Right, again, just some questions that I think are helpful when it comes to identifying what our idol is. Because again, if we have settled for a substituted idol, we will struggle to understand the real value of the kingdom. And the unfortunate thing about an idol is that, an idol can work for a little while. It can function well within a person's life for a little while, but inevitably, in the end, an idol just continues to demand more and more and more while it delivers less and less and less. And in the end, it will always chew you up and spit you out. And I think the thing is, it just hasn't happened to the wealthy young man in the story yet. That's why he's unable to let go, because maybe up until this point, it's actually been working for him. His life is working. But the thing is, the man in the parable, the one who is willing to give up everything, I think he's already on the other side of this. And that's why there is such a willingness, such an ease, such a joy even in giving up everything he has to take hold of this, because he's like a man who's been wandering through the desert and has finally stumbled upon an oasis, the one thing that can give him life, that can quench his thirst. And he recognizes it, and he knows that it is worth more than anything and everything that he has ever seen in this life. So he's able to give it all away in joy, while the wealthy young man walks away in sadness. And so, again, the question is there any inherent need for the gospel? Any person, any group of people, any particular demographic that has a need for what Jesus is offering in the kingdom and according to the gospel? The answer is yes, and it's all of humanity. It's every single one of us. And that's why what Jesus is offering in the kingdom is a chance to scrap our substituted idols and instead be restored to the relationship with God that we were made for, and to walk in the life that we were created for. And so as we get ready to close today, as we kind of bringing things together here, if you would humor me, let's just play the Jesus ultimatum game one more time, but in a slightly different way. So let's just say, again, you're the man in the parable, a woman in similar circumstances, but instead of, hiking at Donut Falls, this time you're just moseying about a bookstore or a coffee shop, and you come upon one of these green journals, and you're like, man, that is so green. I have to have this journal. And as you're flipping through it, you're looking through the pages, and you find inside, you find a free ticket to the one thing that you have been wanting in this life more than anything else. And by that, I mean, if you've been looking for a promotion, it's not necessarily that the free ticket is for the promotion, but the free ticket is for everything that you think the promotion is going to give you. So instead of the promotion, what the free ticket delivers is actually, the chance to rest and to be well provided for, and even to be content in your circumstances and to enjoy some measure of respect within a community that matters to you. It's a free ticket to that. Or let's say that you got slightly different circumstances, and one of the things you've longed for is a family, and the free ticket is maybe not necessarily to the relationships in particular that you want, to the structure that you want, but what it delivers to you is a chance to exist in a community, in a group of people where you are known, where you are loved, you are cherished, you are valued, you are respected. And that's true not only of you, but of everyone in the group, that it's a free ticket to that kind of community. Or maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a chance to finally deal with whatever thing that's been plaguing you in life. Maybe there's been anger that flares up and erupts within your life, and it's a chance to really get under the surface and deal with that. Maybe it's a chance to deal with this addiction that's been plaguing you for years. Maybe it's a chance to finally find forgiveness and to be washed once and for all of the shame that you carry within a community, to be rid of it, whatever it is you're looking for. Let's say inside the journal you find the free ticket to that thing. And my question is, how much would you be willing to pay? Well, the good news is, no matter how much you'd be willing, you don't have to pay a dime Because the gospel truth is Jesus paid the price that we couldn't, so that we could receive the invitation to his kingdom. Jesus paid the price that you and I could never pay, so that we could receive the invitation to his kingdom that we never deserved. And there's a couple of different pieces to that. On the one hand, you and I could never pay because we could never actually amass the resources. Even if we pooled all of our stuff together here and figured out whatever number that arises to and sold everything, we still collectively would not have enough to pay for the kingdom. We wouldn't have it. We don't possess it. None of us could ever possess it. But on the other hand, we can't pay for it. And we don't have to pay for it because the price has already been paid. It's like when you go to In-N-Out for a quick meal and you hit up that drive-through and 12 hours later you finally get to the window and you find out, let's say you get to the window and at the end of that long wait, you realize, you take out your card and you go to pay and they say, no, actually you're good. The car in front of you already paid. And you say, well, I'd still like to pay for my meal. They say, you can't. It's already been paid. When Jesus lived the perfect life that you and I couldn't, when he gave himself on the cross in our place, and when he rose from the grave, he was paying our meal, our ticket, the price for the kingdom that you and I could never pay, so that we could receive the invitation freely. And the bottom line is, the invitation to the kingdom is an invitation to the life we were made for. It's an invitation to the life you were made for, and it's better than anything you've ever imagined and worth more than everything and anything in this life. If we can only understand its real value. Let's pray together. Jesus, we thank you for the time together this morning. We thank you for the chance to look into your parables, to see these stories that you taught, and to see the things that they communicate about your kingdom. We thank you for the ways that impacts our lives and gives us the chance to see the real value and the real worth of what you have done on our behalf and what you have offered to us. So I just ask that as we continue to reflect on that it would lead our desire to honor you, our desire to trust you, to just grow, and even the joy that we find in all the things that you've done for us, that would continue to grow as well. And our gratitude for the ways that you were willing to serve us, to sacrifice for us in order to bring us into the life that we were made for. And so for all that, we thank you and we praise you this morning. Amen.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's message and trusting us with your time. If you'd like to connect with one of our pastors or staff, you can easily do that by visiting smccutah.org/connect. When you fill out that quick form, they will get back to you within a few days and be able to connect with you. As well, if you'd like to know more about taking a next step at SMCC, you can easily look at what next steps we have by visiting smccutah.org/next steps. And lastly, if you found today's message both hopeful and helpful, I would encourage you to do maybe one of two things. First, you can share this message with someone that would find it helpful. And you can also choose to partner with us financially so that more people can see messages like this. You can find more information on what that looks like by visiting smccutah.org/give. Again, thank you for joining us today, and I hope to see you at one of our locations soon.